No one dared touch the little wolf. He lay alone beneath the twisted roots of the blackthorn forest, trembling so violently that the wet leaves around him shook with every ragged breath. Rain poured through the branches, soaking his silver-white fur until it clung to his tiny body like ice. His pale blue eyes stared into nothing at all. He was blind. 3 broken arrows protruded from his side, and a rusted iron trap had crushed one of his hind legs. Every time he tried to crawl, he whimpered. A heartbreaking sound that echoed through the silent forest. The villagers heard those cries. They turned away. "Don't go near it," an old hunter warned, backing away with fear in his eyes. "That's no ordinary cub. The blind wolf brings death. Anyone who touches it will curse their entire bloodline." One by one, the villagers disappeared down the muddy trail, leaving the tiny creature alone to die. Then a young woman stepped out from the trees. Elena was 22, the daughter of a poor herbalist who had died the previous winter. She owned little more than a weathered cottage, a basket of healing herbs, and enough dried roots to survive the coming week. She looked at the frightened cub. Then at the blood staining the forest floor. Without a single word, she knelt. Ignoring every terrified shout behind her, Elena snapped the iron trap open with both trembling hands, even as the frightened cub bared its tiny fangs and tried to bite her. Tears filled her eyes as she gently pulled the arrows free one by one, wrapped his wounds with strips torn from her only cloak, and lifted his fragile body against her chest. The tiny wolf stopped struggling. Instead, he rested his head over her heartbeat. As though, for the first time in days, he finally felt safe. What Elena didn't know was that this blind little wolf wasn't abandoned. He had been stolen. He wasn't cursed. He wasn't wild. He wasn't ordinary. He was the missing heir to the Alpha Kingdom. And before sunrise, the most feared Alpha King in history would burn villages, interrogate nobles, and unleash thousands of warriors across the kingdom searching for the child now sleeping peacefully in the arms of a poor herbalist who had just changed the fate of an empire forever. Chapter 1, The Girl Who Chose Compassion. The rain showed no mercy. It hammered the forest canopy with relentless force, turning narrow paths into rivers of mud and washing away every familiar scent. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the towering pines in brief, ghostly bursts before plunging everything back into darkness. Elena tightened her grip around the trembling wolf cub nestled inside her cloak. He was lighter than she expected. Far too light. His tiny ribs pressed against her arm with every shallow breath, and his heart beat so rapidly that it frightened her. "You've been alone for a long time, haven't you?" she whispered. The cub couldn't answer. Instead, his small nose twitched as if memorizing her scent. Though his pale eyes remained unfocused, he slowly nudged closer until his head rested beneath her chin. Elena smiled despite herself. "It's all right," she murmured. "You're safe now." Behind her, hurried footsteps splashed through the mud. "Elena." She turned. 3 villagers hurried toward her, lanterns swaying wildly in the storm. At their front was Garrick, the village blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man who had known Elena since she was a child. The moment he saw the cub in her arms, all the color drained from his face. "What have you done?" he shouted. Elena frowned. "I saved him. You should have left it there. It was dying." "So what?" another villager cried. "That creature is cursed." "It isn't cursed," Elena replied quietly. "You don't know that. I know pain when I see it." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Old Mara, the village elder, stepped forward slowly, gripping a carved walking stick. Her wrinkled eyes never left the cub. "When I was a girl," she whispered, "my grandmother told me about a wolf born without sight. The rain seemed to grow quieter. They said kingdoms would fall if anyone sheltered it." Another flash of lightning split the sky. The cub flinched violently. Without thinking, Elena wrapped both arms around him protectively. "He isn't a curse," she said. "He's terrified." For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the rain filled the silence. Finally, Garrick sighed heavily. "You've always had too soft a heart." He looked toward the forest. "If the wolves come looking for him, they'll kill every one of us." Elena glanced down at the tiny cub. His breathing had become weaker. His ears barely twitched anymore. She could feel his body growing colder despite the warmth of her embrace. "If I leave him here," she said softly, "he'll be dead before sunrise." No one argued. Because everyone knew she was right. The silence became answer enough. Elena adjusted the cub carefully against her chest. "I'm taking him home." Gasps spread through the group. "You can't. My cottage is barely a mile away. What if his pack follows? What if they're monsters? What if they burn the village?" Elena looked each of them in the eyes. "What if he were your child?" The question struck like a hammer. No one answered. Even Garrick lowered his gaze. She gave them a sad smile. "I couldn't save my father." Her voice almost disappeared beneath the rain. "When he became sick last winter, I had no medicine left." She swallowed hard. "I watched the strongest man I ever knew die because no one came." She looked back at the cub. "I won't watch another helpless soul die while I still have the strength to help." Without waiting for permission, Elena turned and began walking. The muddy path twisted through towering pines before opening into a small clearing where a lonely stone cottage stood beneath the shadow of the mountain. Its roof sagged with age. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. The herb garden surrounding it had begun to wilt beneath weeks of neglect. It wasn't much. But it was home. She pushed open the weathered wooden door with her shoulder and hurried inside. The warmth had long since disappeared. She quickly fed the fireplace with the last pieces of dry firewood she had saved for winter. Soon, orange flames danced across the room. The cub whimpered. His tiny body shivered uncontrollably. Elena laid him gently on her small wooden table, careful not to disturb the broken arrows still lodged in his side. She took a slow breath. "This is going to hurt." The cub couldn't see her. But somehow. He turned his face toward the sound of her voice. His tiny tail gave the faintest twitch. Almost. As if he trusted her. Elena reached for the first arrow. Outside. Hidden among the rain and darkness. Golden eyes watched the little cottage from deep within the forest. Not one pair. Not two. Dozens. Silent. Patient. Watching every movement inside. And miles away, inside the towering halls of Blackstone Palace, a warrior dropped to one knee before the Alpha King. His armor was drenched in blood. His voice shook with terror. "Your Majesty. We have searched every valley. Every mountain. Every river crossing." He lowered his head until it touched the marble floor. "We still cannot find the prince." Chapter 2, The King Who Feared Nothing. Except losing his son. The throne room had never been this quiet. Not during war. Not during famine. Not even when the previous Alpha King had died. More than 100 nobles stood shoulder to shoulder beneath towering stone pillars, yet no one dared breathe too loudly. At the center of the chamber stood Alpha King Lucian Ashbourne. 6 feet 7 inches tall, broad-shouldered, draped in black ceremonial armor trimmed with silver wolf fur, he looked less like a man and more like a force of nature. His long raven-black hair hung loose around his shoulders. A neatly trimmed beard framed a face carved from hard lines and impossible discipline. His steel-gray eyes swept across the room like drawn blades. No one met them. Not for long. Every noble in the kingdom knew the same truth. The Alpha King feared nothing. Until today. His son was missing. The warrior kneeling before him kept his forehead pressed against the marble floor. "My king." Lucian said nothing. The silence stretched. The commander's breathing grew faster. Finally. "We found blood near the northern cliffs." Another pause. But no body. Still nothing. The commander squeezed his eyes shut. "We believe Prince Orion may have been taken." The words echoed through the enormous hall. Several nobles quietly inhaled. One elderly duke crossed himself beneath his cloak. Another looked toward the doors as though considering escape. Lucian remained perfectly still. Only the tightening of his jaw betrayed that he had heard. "Believe?" His voice was calm. Too calm. The commander swallowed. We cannot confirm it, Your Majesty." Lucian descended the marble steps one slow step at a time. Each footfall echoed across the chamber. No one moved. No one dared. He stopped directly before the kneeling commander. "When did my son disappear?" "3 days ago, Your Majesty." "And you tell me now?" The commander's entire body trembled. "We hoped." "You hoped?" Lucian repeated. "You hoped to find the heir to this kingdom before informing his father?" "My king, we believed." "You believed incorrectly." The room fell colder. Lucian turned away. He walked toward the towering window overlooking the endless forest surrounding Blackstone Palace. Rain lashed against the glass. Somewhere beyond those mountains. His son was alone. Blind. Unable to hunt. Unable to defend himself. His hands slowly clenched behind his back. Only one person noticed. Queen Mother Selene. She sat quietly beside the throne, silver hair woven into an elegant braid. Unlike the frightened nobles, she did not fear her son. She understood him. She saw the father beneath the king. Quietly she spoke. "Lucian." He didn't turn. "He'll still be alive." Silence. "He has your stubbornness." A few nervous chuckles almost escaped the nobles. They died instantly. Lucian finally spoke. "My son cannot see." His voice cracked so softly that only Selene heard it. "He doesn't know who to run from. He doesn't know who to trust." The room froze. Many of the nobles had never heard emotion in their king's voice. Not once. Not ever. Selene rose from her chair. "He isn't alone." Lucian finally looked at her. "What makes you so certain?" "A mother's heart." She smiled sadly. "Someone kind has already found him." Several ministers exchanged skeptical looks. One cleared his throat. "Your Majesty." Lucian's gaze shifted toward him. The man immediately regretted speaking. "We have received reports." "What reports?" "Villagers claim they've seen a cursed blind wolf wandering Blackthorn Forest." Another noble snorted. "Superstitious nonsense." "I agree. The peasants invent ghost stories every winter." Lucian's expression darkened. "What else?" The minister hesitated. "They say." He swallowed. "A young woman carried the creature away." Every conversation stopped. Selene's eyes widened slightly. Lucian stepped forward. "What young woman?" "We don't know." "Where?" "A small village called Briar Hollow." Lucian's heartbeat thundered once. Then again. He looked toward his captain. "Prepare Nightfang." The captain blinked. "Your Majesty." "My horse." "Immediately." "My king," another advisor interrupted cautiously. If the rumors are false. Lucian's golden wolf eyes flashed. If there is even the smallest chance, I will search every inch of this kingdom myself. No one argued. Within moments, horns echoed through the palace grounds. Stable hands sprinted in every direction. Elite wolf riders armed themselves. War banners unfurled in the rain. The palace transformed into organized chaos. Thousands of soldiers prepared to ride. Not for war. Not for conquest. For one child. High above the courtyard, lightning split the black sky. Lucian mounted Nightfang in one effortless movement. The enormous black warhorse pawed violently at the ground. The captain approached carefully. How many men shall accompany you, your majesty? Lucian looked toward the dark forest stretching beyond the kingdom. As many as it takes. He lowered his voice. If anyone has harmed my son, the earth itself will remember what happens next. The massive palace gates groaned open. Thousands of mounted warriors surged into the storm. Like a black river flowing toward the forest. Miles away, Elena finished grinding herbs inside her tiny cottage. She carefully mixed crushed moonleaf with honey and warm spring water before gently lifting the blind cub into her lap. Come on, little one. You have to drink. The cub weakly sniffed the wooden spoon. His tiny tongue cautiously licked the medicine. Then another. And another. Until the entire mixture was gone. Elena smiled with relief. There. That's better. She reached down to stroke the fur behind his ears. The cub gave a tiny, contented sigh. For the first time since she had found him. His tail wagged. Just once. Outside. Hidden among the trees. A massive black wolf watched the cottage. His scarred muzzle lifted into the rain. He caught the scent of the tiny prince. Then. Another scent. Human. Female. Kindness. The old wolf slowly lowered himself onto the wet forest floor. He did not growl. He did not attack. Instead, the ancient guardian silently took his place beneath the trees, standing watch over the little cottage until his king arrived. Chapter 3, The Cub Who Refused to Let Go. The fire crackled softly. Its warm glow chased away the darkness that lingered inside Elena's tiny cottage, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. The storm still raged outside. Rain battered the roof. Wind rattled the shutters. But inside, for the first time in days, the little wolf cub slept peacefully. Elena sat beside him on the floor, her back resting against the edge of her narrow bed. She hadn't slept. Every few minutes she reached over and rested 2 fingers beneath the cub's tiny jaw. Checking his breathing. Checking his heartbeat. Making sure he was still alive. You're stubborn, she whispered with a tired smile. I suppose that's a good thing. The cub stirred. His blind eyes slowly opened. They stared into nothing. Yet somehow, he turned his face directly toward her voice. His little nose twitched. He crawled clumsily across the blanket until he bumped against her leg. Then, with surprising determination, he climbed into her lap. Oh. Elena laughed softly. You've decided this belongs to you now? The cub answered by curling into a tight little ball against her stomach. His tiny tail thumped once against her arm. Elena's smile faded into something gentler. When I was little, she whispered, stroking behind his ears, my father used to tell me that frightened creatures don't choose people. They choose safety. The cub sighed. It wasn't the restless cry of pain she'd heard the night before. It was peaceful. Trusting. She carefully examined his wounds. The bleeding had stopped. The herbs were working. But the crushed leg worried her. The swelling had become worse overnight. If I don't set the bone today, you may never walk properly again. She stood and crossed the room. The shelves were almost empty. Only a handful of dried herbs remained. A single jar of honey. Half a loaf of coarse bread. Some willow bark. Nothing more. Elena quietly sighed. I'll need moon root. Her smile disappeared. Moon root only grew deep inside blackthorn forest. Exactly where every sensible villager refused to go. She looked back at the sleeping cub. I suppose neither of us has ever been very sensible. Just after sunrise. A sharp knock echoed through the cottage. 3 quick knocks. Then another. Elena frowned. Nobody visited her this early. She opened the door cautiously. Garrick stood outside. His heavy cloak dripped rainwater onto the porch. You've got company, he muttered. My company usually has feathers. Garrick didn't smile. They're asking about you. Elena's stomach tightened. Who? Travelers. What kind? He looked toward the road. The kind carrying swords. Elena stepped outside. 3 mounted men waited near the edge of the clearing. Their cloaks were soaked from the journey. Their horses were exhausted. None wore royal colors. But something about them felt disciplined. Dangerous. The oldest rider removed his hood. We're searching for a missing wolf. Elena's heartbeat stumbled. A wolf? He nodded. Very young. Silver fur. Blind. She forced herself to remain calm. I haven't seen one. The rider studied her face for several seconds. Long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then his gaze drifted past her. Toward the cottage. May we look inside? Garrick immediately stepped between them. This is private property. We're authorized by the crown. Then show me your seal. The rider hesitated. Just for a heartbeat. It was enough. Garrick folded his arms. I thought so. The 3 men exchanged glances. The oldest finally inclined his head. Our apologies. If you hear anything, report it immediately. They turned their horses around and disappeared into the trees. Elena waited until they were completely gone before releasing the breath she'd been holding. Garrick looked at her. You lied. Yes. You've never lied to me before. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. They weren't soldiers. No. They smelled like mercenaries. Elena frowned. How do you know? I've made enough weapons over the years. He lowered his voice. They weren't looking for that cub to rescue it. The word sent a chill through her. They wanted to find it first. Inside the cottage. The little wolf suddenly whimpered. Elena hurried back inside. The cub was awake. His tiny body trembled violently. His ears flattened. He began sniffing the air frantically. What is it? She knelt beside him. He pushed himself toward the door. Then stopped. He whimpered again. A frightened, desperate sound. It's all right. She lifted him gently into her arms. They're gone. The cub buried his face beneath her chin. His heartbeat raced so fast she could feel it through her dress. Then something unexpected happened. He began pawing weakly at the leather cord hanging around Elena's neck. The old necklace. The only thing her father had left her. A small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. The cub refused to let it go. Tiny paws wrapped around it. His nose pressed against it again and again. What is it? Elena whispered. You've never noticed this before. The pendant suddenly felt warm. Not hot. Warm. As though responding to the cub's touch. Elena frowned. That's strange. The warmth vanished as quickly as it had come. The cub finally relaxed. Still clutching the pendant. Still refusing to release it. Far beyond Briar Hollow. The Alpha King's army reached the northern forest. Thousands of riders spread across the mountains like a tide of black steel. Captain Rowan galloped beside King Lucian. We've searched 12 villages. Nothing. Lucian's expression never changed. Continue. Another scout rode toward them at full speed. My king. Lucian pulled Nightfang to a stop. What is it? We questioned travelers near Briar Hollow. And? They reported seeing 3 armed men asking about a blind wolf. Lucian's eyes hardened. They weren't ours. No, your majesty. Silence. Then. They arrived before us. Every instinct inside Lucian screamed the same terrifying truth. Someone else knew where his son was. Someone else was hunting the royal heir. His wolf surged beneath his skin. Golden eyes flashed. The air itself seemed to grow heavier. Captain Rowan's horse took an uneasy step backward. Lucian slowly looked toward the distant hills where smoke curled lazily from a single lonely cottage. Ride. His voice was cold enough to freeze the rain. No banners. No horns. If those men are hunting my son, we hunt them first. Chapter 4. The hunter became the hunted ****. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No birds sang. No squirrels darted through the branches. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elena noticed it the moment she stepped beyond the tree line. A woven basket hung from her arm as she carefully followed the narrow trail toward the moonroot grove. Every few steps, she glanced over her shoulder. The feeling wouldn't leave her. Someone was watching. She tightened her grip on the small hunting knife tucked into her belt. I'll only be a few minutes, she whispered, looking back toward her cottage, barely visible through the mist. The little wolf cub was sleeping safely inside. Or so she hoped. Inside the cottage. The cub wasn't asleep. His ears stood straight. His tiny nose twitched constantly. He paced across the blanket, whining softly. Then suddenly, he stopped. His head snapped toward the forest. Though blind, he somehow sensed something approaching. Not one. Several. His little body trembled. A low growl escaped his throat. The sound was surprisingly deep for such a tiny creature. Far from the cottage, 3 riders emerged silently from the trees. The same men who had visited that morning. Only now, they weren't pretending anymore. Their cloaks had been discarded. Black leather armor covered their bodies. Curved swords hung at their waists. Each wore the mark of a broken fang burned into the back of one gloved hand. The girl left, one of them whispered. The oldest nodded. Search the cottage. What about the cub? His expression remained cold. The buyer only asked for proof. The cub doesn't need to be alive. Several miles away, King Lucian suddenly pulled Nightfang to a violent stop. Every rider behind him halted instantly. Captain Rowan frowned. My king? Lucian slowly lifted his head. His eyes narrowed. There. He pointed toward the distant mountains. A thin column of smoke rose into the gray sky. Not from a chimney. From a signal fire. Someone was sending a message. Rowan's face darkened. They've found him. Lucian's wolf surged beneath his skin. Every instinct screamed the same command. Faster. Without another word, Nightfang exploded forward. The great black stallion tore through the forest like a living storm. Hundreds of elite riders followed. Branches snapped beneath pounding hooves. Mud flew into the air. The hunt had become a race. Back in the forest, Elena knelt beside a cluster of pale blue flowers growing between moss-covered stones. Moonroot. She smiled with relief. There you are. Carefully, she loosened the roots from the damp earth. Enough to make medicine. Enough to save the cub's leg. As she reached for another plant, she froze. Footprints. Fresh. Far too large to belong to any villager. 3 different sets. Leading toward her cottage. Her heartbeat skipped. No. She dropped the basket. Moonroot scattered across the ground. Then she ran. Branches whipped against her face. Her lungs burned. Every terrible possibility raced through her mind. Please. Please let him be safe. The cottage door stood open. It swayed gently in the wind. Elena stumbled into the clearing. No. She sprinted forward. The room had been torn apart. The table overturned. Shelves smashed. Glass covered the floor. Her blankets had been slashed open. The medicine jars lay shattered. Cub. Her voice shook. Little one. Silence. Then. A tiny whimper. She dropped to her knees. The blind cub had wedged himself beneath the fireplace, trembling violently. Oh. Relief flooded through her. There you are. She reached toward him. The cub crawled into her arms so quickly he nearly knocked himself over. His tiny body shook uncontrollably. It's all right. I'm here. She kissed the top of his head. Then noticed something. The floor. Large muddy footprints. One of them ended only inches from where the cub had hidden. They had almost found him. A cold chill ran down her spine. Whoever these men were, they would come back. Outside. A twig snapped. Elena slowly turned. 3 figures stood at the edge of the clearing. The mercenaries. The oldest smiled. I'm impressed. You ran faster than we expected. Elena instinctively stepped backward, shielding the cub beneath her cloak. What do you want? The animal. It's injured. It belongs to us. No. The smile disappeared. It isn't yours. The oldest drew his sword. It is now. Elena's breathing quickened. She looked toward the forest. No help. No neighbors. Just trees. The mercenaries spread out slowly, cutting off every escape. The youngest laughed. She's really going to fight us. I almost admire that. The leader raised his sword. Take the cub. Before anyone could move, a thunderous roar echoed across the mountains. Not human. Not wolf. Something far larger. The ground itself vibrated. Every horse tethered nearby panicked. The mercenaries froze. What was that? Another roar answered. Closer this time. Much closer. The trees exploded apart. Birds burst into the sky in terrified flocks. Then, an enormous black wolf stepped into the clearing. He was twice the size of any ordinary wolf. Scars crossed his massive shoulders. His golden eyes burned like molten fire. He looked ancient. Powerful. Terrifying. The mercenaries instinctively stepped back. The king's shadow. One whispered. The guardian. The great wolf never looked at them. His eyes remained fixed on the tiny blind cub trembling in Elena's arms. The cub heard the deep rumble. His ears lifted. Instead of hiding, his little tail began wagging. Once. Twice. Then, for the very first time since Elena had found him, the blind cub let out a tiny, joyful bark. The ancient wolf lowered his enormous head. Not in submission. Not in surrender. But in recognition. As though he had finally found the child he had sworn to protect. And from somewhere deep within the forest, the deafening sound of hundreds of galloping horses thundered toward the clearing. Chapter 5, The King Who Found His Heir. The thunder of hooves shook the earth. It rolled through Blackthorn Forest like an approaching storm, sending frightened birds into the sky and scattering deer into the undergrowth. The three mercenaries exchanged uneasy glances. The oldest cursed under his breath. "They're here." The younger man tightened his grip on his sword. "It can't be the king's army already." "No." The leader's face paled. "It's worse. The king himself." The ancient black wolf never moved. He stood between Elena and the mercenaries, his massive body forming an unbreakable wall. His scarred muzzle lifted slightly. A low growl vibrated deep within his chest. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the promise of death. The youngest mercenary instinctively took a step backward. I've heard stories about him." The leader didn't take his eyes off the beast. Every one of them was true. The guardian wolf had protected the royal bloodline for nearly 3 decades. He had survived wars. He had slain rogue alphas. Entire packs had vanished after provoking him. No one who valued his life challenged the king's guardian. Yet today, they had already gone too far. Elena clutched the blind cub tightly against her chest. She could feel his tiny heartbeat. Fast. Excited. Not frightened. The cub stretched his nose toward the enormous wolf. His tail wagged furiously. "You know him," she whispered. The guardian's golden eyes softened for the briefest moment. He took one slow step forward. Then another. Until he stood only a few feet away. Very carefully, he lowered his massive head. The little cub reached out with one tiny paw. It landed on the guardian's nose. The ancient wolf closed his eyes. A soft rumble escaped him. Not a growl. Something gentler. Almost a greeting. Elena stared in amazement. "I've never seen anything like this." A sharp whistle shattered the moment. The leader of the mercenaries barked an order. "Kill the wolf." 3 swords flashed from their scabbards. The youngest rushed first. He never reached his target. The guardian moved faster than sight. One enormous paw struck the man squarely in the chest. The mercenary flew through the air like a rag doll before crashing into the trunk of an ancient oak. The crack of breaking ribs echoed through the clearing. He never stood again. The second attacker lunged from the side. The guardian twisted. His massive jaws clamped around the man's sword. Steel snapped in half as though it were dry wood. The mercenary froze. For one fatal heartbeat. The guardian roared. The blast of sound knocked the terrified man onto his back. He scrambled away, abandoning his weapon. "I surrender." The guardian ignored him. His eyes settled on the leader. The man who had ordered the cub's death. The leader slowly backed away. Sword trembling. I was paid." The guardian continued advancing. "I didn't know who the cub was." Another step. "I swear it." He stumbled over a tree root and fell. For the first time, The mercenary understood true fear. Then, a voice colder than winter filled the clearing. Neither did I. Everyone turned. A lone black stallion emerged from the forest. Its coat gleamed despite the rain. Its rider wore black armor etched with silver wolves. Long raven-black hair rested against broad shoulders. Steel-gray eyes swept over the clearing. The air itself seemed to grow heavier. Even the rain appeared to soften. The guardian immediately stepped aside, lowering his head. Not to a beast. To his king. Alpha King Lucian Ashbourne had arrived. Behind him, hundreds of elite wolf riders poured into the clearing, surrounding it in seconds. Not one sword pointed toward Elena. Every blade pointed at the mercenaries. Captain Rowan dismounted. Secure them. Within moments, the remaining 2 men were forced to their knees. Their weapons scattered across the ground. Lucian never looked at them. His entire world had narrowed to one thing. The tiny blind cub nestled in the arms of a frightened young woman. His son. Alive. For several long seconds, the Alpha King simply stood there. Unable to move. Unable to breathe. The little cub suddenly lifted his head. His tiny ears twitched. He recognized something. A scent. One he had known since birth. He wriggled excitedly in Elena's arms. Easy, she whispered. But the cub would not be still. He let out a tiny bark. Then another. Lucian took one hesitant step forward. Years of discipline. Years of emotional restraint. Years of carrying a kingdom on his shoulders. Cracked in a single heartbeat. My son. His voice was barely audible. The cub answered with an excited whine. He stretched both tiny paws toward the Alpha King. Lucian slowly knelt in the wet grass. The most feared ruler in the kingdom. The man whose enemies called him the Iron Alpha. Knelt without hesitation. Elena looked between the cub and the stranger. Something inside her finally clicked. The guardian's obedience. The soldiers. The royal armor. The impossible authority in his voice. Her eyes widened. You're... Lucian finally looked at her. For the first time, he saw the young woman whose cloak had been torn into bandages. The mud staining her dress. The exhaustion in her eyes. The scratches covering her hands. Hands earned from saving his son. The cub reached toward his father. Then suddenly stopped. Instead of leaving Elena, he buried his face against her neck, refusing to let go. A stunned silence swept across the clearing. Even Captain Rowan blinked. The prince had chosen to stay in the arms of the village girl. Lucian stared at his son. Then at Elena. A strange mixture of gratitude, relief, and confusion crossed his face. The cub gave another determined little whine and clung even tighter to Elena's cloak. For the first time in his life, the Alpha King realized there was something his power could not command. His son's trust. And somehow, a poor herbalist had earned it. Chapter 6, The Debt No King Could Ever Repay. For a long moment, no one moved. The clearing, moments earlier filled with the clash of steel and the threat of death, fell into complete silence. The tiny prince buried his face deeper into Elena's neck. His small paws clutched her torn cloak as though letting go would mean losing her forever. King Lucian remained on one knee. His outstretched hand slowly lowered. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times over the past 3 days. He had imagined finding his son wounded. He had imagined finding him frightened. He had even prepared himself to find only a body. Never. Not once. Had he imagined his son refusing to come to him. Captain Rowan shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty. Lucian raised one finger. Silence. His eyes never left the little cub. Orion. His voice was gentle now. Far gentler than anyone in his army had ever heard. Its father. The cub lifted his head. His blind eyes searched the darkness they had always known. He recognized the voice. His ears twitched happily. His tiny tail wagged. For a brief moment, it seemed he might leap into Lucian's arms. Instead, he turned and pressed himself against Elena once more. A soft whimper escaped him. As if begging her not to leave. Several soldiers exchanged bewildered glances. Captain Rowan whispered, He thinks she'll disappear. Queen Mother Celine had often said that trust was never demanded. It was earned. Lucian was beginning to understand exactly what she meant. Elena looked from the prince to the Alpha King. I'm sorry. Her voice trembled. I don't know why he's doing this. Lucian slowly rose to his feet. There is nothing to apologize for. His words surprised everyone. Especially the nobles who had ridden with him. The Iron Alpha was famous for demanding perfection. Yet now, there wasn't the slightest hint of anger in his face. Instead, there was gratitude. You saved his life. His gaze fell upon the blood-stained bandages wrapped around Orion's side. You removed the arrows. Elena nodded. They were lodged deeply. Lucian noticed the careful stitching. The wounds were cleaned. I did what my father taught me. The splint on his leg. I set the bone this morning. Lucian knelt beside his son again. This time he wasn't looking at Orion. He was studying the treatment. Every bandage had been placed with remarkable precision. The herbs smelled fresh. The swelling had already begun to reduce. Whoever this young woman was, she possessed remarkable skill. You've studied healing? My father was Briar Hollow's herbalist. And after he died, she lowered her eyes. I continued helping anyone who came. Captain Rowan quietly asked one of the villagers, does she charge for her treatments? Old Garrick gave a bitter laugh. Half the village owes her their lives. And she barely has enough food to feed herself. Rowan frowned. Why? Because if people couldn't pay, she healed them anyway. The captain looked back at Elena with newfound respect. The silence was broken by a harsh laugh. The captured mercenary. Still kneeling. Hands bound behind his back. You people are celebrating the wrong thing. Every eye turned toward him. The leader smiled through bloodied lips. You think we were the only ones looking? Lucian's expression hardened. What do you mean? The mercenary laughed again. There are others. His voice carried a dangerous certainty. Much stronger than us. They don't want ransom. They don't want gold. His smile widened. They want the royal bloodline erased. A chill swept through the clearing. Captain Rowan immediately drew his sword. Who hired you? The mercenary remained silent. Rowan stepped closer. I asked you a question. Still nothing. The leader simply smiled. Then, blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Lucian's eyes narrowed. Stop him. A soldier rushed forward. Too late. The mercenary collapsed. Foam gathered around his lips. Captain Rowan cursed. Poison. He bit down on a hidden capsule. Within seconds, the man was dead. The remaining prisoners stared in horror. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. They told us never to ask names. Lucian looked toward the body. Someone had planned this carefully. Professional assassins. Disposable mercenaries. Hidden poison. This was no random kidnapping. Someone powerful had declared war on his family. The guardian wolf suddenly growled. Not at the prisoners. Not at the soldiers. At the trees. His ears flattened. Every muscle tensed. Lucian immediately recognized the warning. Archers. The command had barely left his mouth. A sharp whistle sliced through the air. An arrow burst from the forest. Straight toward Elena. Toward the prince in her arms. Lucian moved before thought. He threw himself between them. The arrow struck his shoulder with a sickening thud. Several soldiers shouted. Protect the king. Another volley erupted from the trees. The clearing exploded into chaos. Shields rose. Wolves lunged into the forest. Captain Rowan led a dozen warriors toward the hidden attackers. The guardian disappeared into the trees like black lightning. His furious roar echoed through the mountains. Then came screams. One after another. Short. Violent. Final. Elena's heart pounded. My king. Lucian stood perfectly still. He snapped the arrow shaft with one hand and pulled the broken piece free before anyone could stop him. Blood soaked the shoulder of his armor. It's nothing. The royal physician rushed forward. Your Majesty, you're bleeding. Lucian ignored him. Instead, he turned to Elena. Are you hurt? She blinked. What? The arrow. It was aimed at you. He searched her face anxiously. Are you injured? She shook her head. No. The cub whimpered, pressing himself tightly against her. Lucian released a slow breath. Only then did he seem to notice the blood running down his own arm. Captain Rowan returned moments later. There were 6 archers. And? They're all dead. No insignia. No identifying marks. Lucian nodded once. They expected to die. Yes, Your Majesty. The Alpha King's gaze drifted to the frightened woman still protecting his son with her own body despite the danger. In that instant, one truth became impossible to ignore. The assassins hadn't just discovered the prince. They had discovered Elena. Anyone willing to stand between the heir and death had now become a target herself, not as a prisoner, not as a servant, but as the personal guardian and healer of my son. A stunned silence followed. Even Captain Rowan stared at his king in disbelief. No commoner had ever been invited into the royal palace under the king's personal protection. And judging by the way Prince Orion refused to leave Elena's arms, Lucian had a feeling this was only the beginning of a debt that no king, no matter how powerful, could ever truly repay. Chapter 7. The journey to Blackstone Palace. The clearing fell silent once more. Only the soft patter of rain and the crackling of broken branches disturbed the stillness left behind by the battle. Elena remained frozen. The Alpha King's words echoed inside her mind. You will come to Blackstone Palace. She looked down at the tiny prince nestled safely against her chest. He had finally fallen asleep again. One tiny paw still clutched the silver crescent pendant hanging around her neck, as though he feared even sleep might separate them. Elena slowly lifted her eyes. My king. Lucian waited. I cannot leave. A murmur rippled through the gathered soldiers. Few people refused the Alpha King. No one had expected the poor herbalist to do so. Lucian's expression remained calm. And why not? She glanced toward her little stone cottage. It isn't much. But it was my father's. I buried him beneath the old willow behind the house. My herb garden is here. My patients are here. If I leave, Who will care for them? The sincerity in her voice caught even Captain Rowan by surprise. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't asking for wealth. She was worried about everyone except herself. Old Garrick stepped forward. His weathered face softened. Elena. She turned toward him. You've looked after this village ever since your father passed. He smiled sadly. Now it's our turn to look after yours. The village elder, Mara, slowly nodded. We'll tend the herbs. Another woman stepped forward. I'll feed your chickens. A young boy raised his hand nervously. I can fetch water. One by one. The villagers volunteered. Not because the king stood nearby, but because Elena had spent years caring for them without expecting anything in return. Her eyes filled with tears. You'd really do that? Garrick laughed. You've stitched half this village back together. The least we can do is keep weeds out of your garden. For the first time since her father's death, Elena felt something she hadn't expected. She wasn't alone. Captain Rowan quietly approached Lucian. My king. Lucian kept watching Elena. Speak. The palace. What about it? There will be objections. Lucian finally looked at him. The council. The nobles. They won't accept a commoner living inside the royal residence. They'll say she has no title. No bloodline. No place among the court. Lucian's answer came without hesitation. My son disagrees. Rowan glanced toward Prince Orion. The little cub had wrapped all four paws around Elena's arm. Even asleep, he refused to let go. The captain sighed. I suppose that's difficult to argue with. As the soldiers prepared for departure, the royal physician approached Elena carrying a leather satchel. I owe you an apology. She blinked. For what? I believed the prince wouldn't survive. He carefully examined Orion's bandages. Then smiled in genuine admiration. But these. He looked at her with newfound respect. They're remarkable. The herbs were chosen perfectly. You even reduced the swelling. Elena smiled shyly. My father taught me that healing begins before medicine. The physician frowned thoughtfully. What does that mean? He always said. She gently stroked Orion's head. People heal faster when they know someone refuses to abandon them. The elderly physician stood speechless. After 40 years of royal medicine, he had never heard healing explained so simply. Or so truthfully. Several soldiers loaded supplies onto wagons. Another brought fresh blankets. One carefully repaired the broken cottage door before leaving. Captain Rowan noticed. You didn't have to do that. The young soldier shrugged. She saved the prince. It didn't feel right leaving her house broken. Rowan smiled. Kindness was spreading. As preparations continued, the ancient guardian wolf wandered toward the willow tree behind Elena's cottage. He stopped before a simple wooden cross. No name. No grand carving. Just weathered wood. Elena followed him quietly. That's my father. The great wolf lowered his head. For several silent moments, he remained there, almost as though paying his respects. Then something extraordinary happened. He lifted one massive paw and gently brushed away the weeds growing around the grave. Elena stared. He understands. Lucian stepped beside her. He understands more than most men. The guardian looked back at them. Then slowly returned to stand beside Prince Orion. As though his duty had never changed. By late afternoon, the royal procession was ready. Hundreds of mounted guards surrounded several wagons. At the center stood an elegant royal carriage. Captain Rowan opened its door. "My lady." Elena immediately shook her head. "Oh, no. I'll walk." Several soldiers smiled. Lucian almost did too. "You'll ride." "I've never been inside a carriage." "Then today is your first." She hesitated. "It looks expensive." "It is. I might dirty it." A few guards quietly chuckled. Lucian looked at the mud covering his own armor. "So have I." For the first time. A tiny smile appeared on Elena's face. It transformed her entire expression. Lucian noticed. So did half the soldiers. Captain Rowan leaned toward another guard. "I've never seen His Majesty make a joke." The guard whispered back. "I don't think he has." Elena carefully climbed into the carriage. The moment she sat down, Prince Orion curled into her lap. Within seconds, he was asleep again. Lucian watched through the open door. His son looked peaceful. Safer than he had in days. He closed the carriage door gently, not wanting to wake him. Then mounted Nightfang once more. To Blackstone Palace. The great gates of the formation opened. The procession slowly began moving. Behind them, the villagers stood together at the edge of Briar Hollow, waving goodbye. Elena looked back through the carriage window until the little stone cottage disappeared behind the trees. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She whispered softly, "I'll come home, father. I promise." She didn't notice the silver crescent pendant around her neck glowing faintly beneath Orion's tiny paw. Outside the carriage, the guardian wolf suddenly lifted his head. His golden eyes scanned the distant ridgeline. Far above them, a cloaked figure stood upon a rocky cliff, watching the royal procession disappear into the forest. The stranger's face remained hidden beneath a dark hood. But one gloved hand rested on the hilt of a black sword engraved with a crimson serpent. He smiled. "So, the heir lives." His cold voice vanished into the wind. "No matter. The game has only just begun." Chapter 8, The Prince Who Slept Through the Storm. The journey to Blackstone Palace should have taken 2 days. By sunset, the royal procession had traveled barely half that distance. Not because the roads were dangerous. Not because the wagons were slow. But because every few miles, Prince Orion woke. And every time he did, he reached for Elena. Inside the royal carriage, warm afternoon light filtered through velvet curtains. The little prince stirred in his sleep. His tiny ears twitched. His nose wrinkled. Then he whimpered. Elena immediately looked down. "What is it?" Orion's small paws searched blindly through the blankets. Looking for something. Looking for someone. The moment his paw touched Elena's hand, he relaxed. His breathing slowed. His tiny tail wagged once. Then he drifted back to sleep. Across from her, the royal physician chuckled quietly. "I've delivered royal pups for nearly 40 years. I've never seen one attach himself to someone so quickly." Elena smiled faintly. He was frightened. "He still is." The physician nodded thoughtfully. "No." His eyes remained on Orion. "I don't think he's frightened anymore. He simply knows where he feels safe." Outside, Captain Rowan rode beside the king's horse. "My king." Lucian kept his eyes on the road. "The prince?" "Sleeping." Lucian allowed himself a quiet breath. "And the healer?" "She's reading." Lucian frowned. "Reading?" Rowan nodded. "One of the medical books from the physician's satchel." Lucian looked genuinely surprised. The journey has barely begun. I know. She's already halfway through it. A faint smile touched Rowan's face. I believe she's correcting the margins. Lucian raised an eyebrow. Correcting? The physician looked offended. Inside the carriage, the elderly physician watched Elena closely. She carefully turned another page. Then politely asked, "May I say something?" He smiled. "Of course. The dosage written here." She hesitated. "I think it's too much." He blinked. "This text has been used in the palace for 20 years. I know. But moonroot becomes poisonous when mixed with frost thyme." The physician frowned. "It shouldn't. My father discovered it does." She pointed toward a faded passage. "Only when the patient has a fever." The old physician stared at the page. Then slowly looked back at her. "I've lost 3 patients to that mixture." Elena's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "So was I." Silence filled the carriage. Finally, the physician laughed. A genuine laugh. "I've spent 4 decades believing I knew everything. And a village herbalist has humbled me before dinner." Elena blushed. "I wasn't trying to." "I know. That's why it's impressive." Near sunset, the procession reached a narrow stone bridge crossing the Silver River. Captain Rowan suddenly raised his fist. "Halt!" Hundreds of riders stopped instantly. Lucian rode forward. "What is it?" Rowan pointed toward the bridge. One of the stone arches had collapsed. The center section now hung dangerously over the rushing river below. "It won't support the wagons." Lucian studied the damage. "How long to repair it?" "Until tomorrow." The king looked toward the darkening sky. "No. We camp here." Within minutes, the soldiers transformed the riverbank into a temporary royal camp. Tents rose. Fires crackled. Guards spread into defensive positions. Elena stepped out of the carriage for the first time in hours. She stretched slowly. Orion remained asleep in her arms. He certainly likes sleeping. The physician smiled. Growing pups usually do. Just then, the guardian wolf appeared from the trees. His massive paws made almost no sound against the earth. The soldiers instinctively stepped aside. He walked directly toward Orion. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he gently nudged Elena's arm. "What is it?" The guardian turned toward the river. Then back at Elena. He repeated the motion. Captain Rowan frowned. "I think he wants you to follow him." Lucian watched silently. "So do I." The guardian led them along a quiet trail beside the river. Only Lucian, Rowan, Elena, and 2 guards followed. After several minutes, the great wolf stopped. Before them lay a small meadow filled with pale silver flowers. Their petals shimmered beneath the evening light. Elena gasped. "Moon lilies." The physician caught up moments later. His eyes widened. "I haven't seen these in years." Elena knelt beside the flowers. "They only bloom where the water is perfectly clean." She gently picked one blossom. Its fragrance was delicate, sweet, peaceful. The little prince stirred. His tiny nose twitched. Then, for the first time, his cloudy blue eyes seemed to focus. Just for an instant, he reached toward the flower. The cloudiness faded ever so slightly before returning. Elena froze. "Did you see that?" The physician nodded slowly. "I did." Lucian stepped closer. "What happened?" Elena looked at the flower. Then at Orion. I don't know. But. She swallowed. I don't think his blindness is ordinary. The physician agreed. I've always believed he was born blind. But that. He looked at the moon lilies. Looked like recognition. Lucian's heartbeat quickened. You mean? The physician hesitated. I'm saying. There may still be hope. The Alpha King looked down at his sleeping son. For years. He had accepted that Orion would never see the world. Now. His gaze lingered on the glowing moon lilies below. Because if she truly knows how to heal the prince, she may become the greatest threat our master has ever faced. Chapter 10, The Wolves Who Knelt. Dawn broke slowly over the royal camp. Golden light spilled through the towering pines, painting the dew-covered grass with ribbons of silver and gold. For the first time in days, the camp was peaceful. No arrows. No screams. No alarms. Only the distant sound of birds greeting the morning. Inside the royal tent, Elena opened her eyes. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. Prince Orion was still curled against her chest, one tiny paw wrapped around her finger. His breathing was calm. His face looked different. Lighter. The fear that had haunted his sleep seemed to have disappeared. She gently brushed a strand of silver-white fur from his forehead. You finally slept. The little cub yawned. His ears twitched. Without opening his eyes, he rubbed his face against her hand. Elena smiled. Good morning to you too. Outside. King Lucian stood beside the campfire, studying a large map spread across a wooden table. Captain Rowan approached. We can reach Blackstone Palace before sunset. Lucian nodded. Double the scouts. They're already ahead. No. Lucian folded the map. I want every hill, every valley, and every river crossing searched. You believe another attack is coming. I know it is. Rowan didn't argue. The king had learned to trust his instincts long ago. They had saved countless lives. A sudden commotion erupted near the edge of the camp. Soldiers began whispering. Some actually stepped backward. Captain Rowan frowned. What now? A young guard came running. My king. What is it? You should see this. Near the eastern tree line. Nearly every soldier in the camp had gathered. Elena stepped outside carrying Orion. She immediately understood why. Wolves. Dozens of them. Gray wolves. Black wolves. White wolves. Old wolves bearing scars from ancient battles. Young wolves barely larger than Orion himself. They emerged silently from the forest. One after another. Not growling. Not hunting. Simply walking. Until more than 50 wolves stood facing the royal camp. Several soldiers instinctively reached for their swords. Lucian raised one hand. No. The wolves weren't threatening anyone. They weren't even looking at the soldiers. Every single pair of eyes rested on Prince Orion. The little cub lifted his head. His ears twitched happily. Then, the impossible happened. The largest wolf stepped forward. An enormous silver male whose muzzle had turned white with age. Slowly, he lowered himself. His front legs folded. Then his head. One by one. Every wolf behind him did the same. The entire pack knelt. Captain Rowan stared. There. He couldn't finish. The royal physician whispered the words instead. They're pledging themselves. Elena looked at Lucian. What does this mean? The Alpha King's expression had become unreadable. It means. He swallowed. They recognized their future alpha. The wolves remained bowed. Not to Lucian. Not to the guardian. To the tiny blind cub resting peacefully in Elena's arms. Orion tilted his head. Though he couldn't see them, he somehow sensed what was happening. He reached one tiny paw toward the wolves. A soft bark escaped him. The entire pack answered. Not with howls. With gentle whines. The sound was filled with affection. Respect. Devotion. Elena's eyes shimmered with tears. They love him. Lucian nodded quietly. They always will. Just then, the guardian wolf stepped forward. The ancient beast approached the kneeling pack. Every wolf lowered its head even further. The guardian turned to face Orion. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he lowered himself too. Captain Rowan's jaw dropped. The guardian has never bowed. The royal physician whispered. Not even to the king. Lucian understood. The guardian wasn't bowing to authority. He was honoring destiny. As the emotional moment unfolded, a sharp cry echoed overhead. Everyone looked up. A massive golden hawk circled above the camp. It cried once. Twice. Then dove toward the ground. Instead of attacking, it landed upon a nearby rock. Tied to one leg was a narrow leather tube. Captain Rowan retrieved it carefully. A message. He handed it to Lucian. The king broke the royal wax seal. His eyes narrowed as he read. Rowan frowned. What is it? Lucian silently passed him the parchment. The captain's face darkened. It can't be. Elena looked between them. My king? Lucian folded the message slowly. It came from Blackstone Palace. Last night. He paused. Someone attempted to assassinate my mother. A stunned silence swept across the camp. The Queen Mother survived. But only barely. Captain Rowan immediately barked orders. Break camp. We leave now. Soldiers rushed in every direction. Horses were saddled. Tents disappeared within minutes. The peaceful morning transformed into organized urgency. Elena climbed back into the royal carriage with Orion asleep against her shoulder. As the procession began moving once more, she looked toward Lucian. My king. He rode beside the carriage. Yes? She hesitated. Who would want to kill your family? Lucian's gaze drifted toward the distant mountains. I don't know. But whoever they are, they're no longer hunting only my son. He looked at Orion. Then at Elena. They're hunting everyone he loves. The words lingered in the air. Elena instinctively tightened her embrace around the little prince. Outside the carriage, hidden among the trees far behind the departing procession, the silver-masked man watched them leave. Beside him stood the cloaked warrior bearing the crimson serpent mark. The wolves have accepted the prince, the warrior said. The masked man smiled faintly. Good. The warrior frowned. Good. The stronger the bond. The masked man turned away. The greater the pain when it is broken. He looked toward the distant silhouette of Blackstone Palace rising against the horizon. And when the palace doors close behind them, the real war will finally begin. Epilogue, The Promise Beneath the Moon. 3 months later. The first snow of winter blanketed Blackstone Kingdom in pure white. From the highest balcony of Blackstone Palace, Elena watched snowflakes drift gently over the kingdom below. The forest stretched endlessly toward the horizon, their branches glittering beneath the morning sun. She still found it difficult to believe she lived here. Not as a servant. Not as a prisoner. but as Prince Orion's personal healer and guardian. Life inside the palace had changed more than she could have imagined. The servants no longer whispered when she passed. The royal physicians sought her advice before preparing medicines. Even the proud nobles, though reluctant at first, had learned that the village herbalist possessed wisdom no expensive education could buy. But the greatest change was Orion. The little prince laughed. It was a bright, joyful sound that echoed across the royal nursery. Elena smiled as Orion stumbled across the thick carpet toward her. His broken leg had healed completely. He still couldn't see. Yet somehow, he always found her. Slowly, she laughed. "You'll fall." Orion ignored her warning. He threw himself into her arms, giggling as she caught him. "There you are." She kissed the top of his head. "You've become much too brave." From the doorway, Queen Mother Selene watched with quiet satisfaction. "I've waited 3 years to hear him laugh like that." Elena looked up. "He laughs every day now." "Because every day," Selene replied softly, "he knows he'll be loved." Footsteps echoed through the hallway. King Lucian entered the nursery. He had just returned from inspecting the northern borders, still dressed in black royal armor dusted with snow. The moment Orion recognized his father's footsteps, his tiny ears lifted. "Papa." The single word stopped Lucian in his tracks. He had heard it many times over the past months. Yet it never failed to move him. He crossed the room in 3 long strides before lifting Orion into his arms. "And how is my brave prince today?" Orion reached for Lucian's beard and laughed. Selene smiled. "The kingdom says you've become softer." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "The kingdom talks too much." "They're right. I know." For once, he didn't mind. That afternoon, the palace courtyard filled with laughter. Children from nearby villages had been invited to celebrate the Winter Moon Festival. Elena insisted that no child should spend the season hungry or alone. Lucian had agreed without hesitation. Hundreds of families gathered inside the palace grounds. No noble titles. No social ranks. Only people. Sharing food. Sharing stories. Sharing hope. Captain Rowan stood beside the king. This never happened before. Lucian watched Elena kneeling among the children, helping them build snow wolves. "No. It didn't." Rowan smiled. "She changed this place." Lucian quietly answered. "She changed all of us." As evening fell, the palace bells rang softly beneath the rising moon. The guardian wolf stood atop the castle walls, his golden eyes scanning the peaceful kingdom below. At his side sat Orion. The little prince leaned comfortably against the ancient wolf's warm fur. Though he still could not see the stars, he smiled toward the sky, as though he somehow knew they were there. Elena joined them moments later. She wrapped a warm cloak around Orion's shoulders. "You'll catch cold." He leaned happily against her. Without warning, he reached up and gently touched her face. Then he smiled. "Mama Ella." Time stopped. Elena froze. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. Behind her, Lucian had heard every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct the child. He simply watched the woman who had saved his son's life, and then given him something no kingdom, no crown, and no amount of power ever could. A mother's love. Their eyes met beneath the moonlight. No words were needed. Some debts could never be repaid. Some bonds could never be broken. And sometimes, the greatest miracle wasn't that a frightened village girl had saved a blind wolf cub. It was that, in saving him, she had healed an entire kingdom. Far beyond the castle walls. Deep within the shadows of the northern mountains. The silver-masked man stood alone before an ancient stone altar. He placed one gloved hand upon a weathered carving of a wolf with glowing eyes. The mountain trembled. A deep, ancient howl echoed from somewhere beneath the earth. The masked man's smile slowly widened. So. The heir has found his protector. He looked toward the distant lights of Blackstone Palace. Excellent. Because the child was never the true prize. His voice became almost a whisper. The girl is. Beneath the altar. Something enormous opened its eyes. Golden eyes. Older than kingdoms. Older than kings. Older than history itself. The true legend. Had only just awakened. The end. For now. Thank you for watching till the end. Please remember to subscribe, like and leave a comment. Tell us where you are watching from.